Hi everyone, welcome to our September garden tour. As the season is winding down, so are the plants, but there's still quite a few harvests for us to get from the garden. This is one of our tomato plants planted in the square foot garden bed here out front. The plant itself is starting to look a little bit sad, but it still has quite a few tomatoes for us to harvest. This variety is called Gold Nugget. It's a cherry tomato. It's one of those compact dwarf tomato varieties. We actually made a whole taste testing video on the tomatoes that we grew this year, and this one is included there if you're curious to check it out and see what it tastes like. So this is our little late September harvest. And right next to the tomato plant, we've got our lavender. This lavender has come back with another set of blooms in September. We had a whole lot of blooms in July that we harvested for cheese and we dried some of it for winter. And now it's back with even more blooms. So that gives us an opportunity to get even more dried lavender for winter teas. We've got two strawberry bushes. One of them gives us these beautiful pink flowers, the other one gives white flowers. And these are ever-bearing strawberries, meaning that they've been giving us berries all season long. Now, they're not the biggest berries. Most of them are actually quite small, but they still taste very, very sweet. And we do like that we can have strawberries in late September. We hope that these two strawberry bushes survive the winter, and we can get a lot more of them in the next season as well. This year, we've had quite a few volunteer sunflowers pop up all over the garden. I've never grown a sunflower that looks like this, so I'm not really sure what variety it is. But this is a single plant that gave quite a few different flowers. So I decided to save one of them for seed by covering it with a cheesecloth to protect it from the birds. So we'll see if we get some seeds. I may grow more next year. Another variety of sunflowers is Red Velvet Queen. Now, this one we have grown before and I quite like it. It self seeded itself this year, which is no complaints on our end. We've got some bachelor buttons growing here. They're quite cute. And then some zinnias growing as well. I have to say, it hasn't been the best year for zinnias for us. They haven't really grown that well. But, every year is different. And then in this center bed, we've got a mix of different herbs, basil, we've got some tomatoes. Um, we planted a few different varieties just to experiment and see what grows well. But I have to say that this year has not been the best year for tomatoes. They are not looking very healthy, and the crop hasn't been the best. We do have a few, like, this beautiful Roma tomato, but not as many as I would normally expect. In the back of the garden, we've got this small raised bed set up with another tomato. This one is called Blonde Cophen tomato. It's a really interesting one. It produces these grapevine looking clusters of flowers with lots and lots of cherry tomatoes. And right next to it is a giant self seeded sunflower. It's gotta be at least 7 feet tall, but I have no idea what variety it is. It just sort of popped up in the garden. And here in the center raised bed, I've got some more calendula growing for our cheese and some more Roma tomatoes on their way to ripening. In the sort of front center of the garden, we have this little patch set up with a mix of beans and cabbage. Now, this year, I have not been successful at growing cabbage at all, except for some red cabbage. However, we have been very successful at growing bush beans this year. We planted two different varieties of bush beans, and both of them grew really well. This is my absolute favorite variety of bush beans. It's called Gold Rush, and I find that it tastes the best out of all the different varieties that I've tried. And it's a really, really good producer. However, I have to say that bunnies do like to eat it, so I did lose quite a few plants to bunnies, and you can see some of them here with sort of exposed branches and no leaves left on them. But we share with nature, so that's okay. We still have quite a few plants left for us to enjoy. And the other variety of bush beans that we grew this year is called dragon tongue beans. These are actually quite interesting. They have this really interesting pattern on them and they grow really well. They're quite prolific, they're easy to grow. And I find that we didn't have as much damage from bunnies on the plants of dragon tongue beans either. So they're definitely a keeper. We'll definitely grow them again in the future. Now, this year we planted somewhere between 15 and 20 bush bean plants, which I really think is probably a bit too much for us. We've had a hard time keeping up with the crops. This has been our most prolific crop of the year, but we've had way, way too much of it. There's still bags and bags of these bush beans in the fridge. Now, one of my favorite plants this year is this petty pen plant. It just grew so massive and it gave us so many petty pans. They just kept growing and growing and growing. And I was really impressed by how prolific it is and the size of the petty pan. And I have to say, the taste of it is far superior to the taste of zucchini, at least in my opinion. So this one petty pan was a pounder. Unlike the petty plant squash, the zucchini plant is not as prolific this year. It it is much smaller in size, and also it produces fewer um, zucchinis, and they're not as big as the petty pan. So it hasn't quite been as successful. And the final harvest this September is our cucumbers. We haven't had good luck growing cucumbers earlier in the season, so we had to wait until September to get a good cucumber harvest. So we're quite happy that it finally came around.